It's an absolute joke that we get so much benefit with so little effort using the QColor component. So let me show you what I mean. Let's say Quasar new page components slash QColor page. Whoop, make sure I write that right. Open up that QColor page. Check that it actually shows up in the menu, and there it is. And this is how easy it is to create the component. Q-color, and we can even make that a self-closing tag. Save it, refresh the page, and we have all of this functionality straight away. How cool is that? Now let's model some data. So let's say v-model is equal to hex, and we'll come down here and we'll say data, return an object here, and hex is going to be equal to, how about hashtag 84FF80. I'm reading off of the bottom screen, so I'm totally cheating right now. And there we go, it automatically sets it to that color for us, which is pretty cool. And there's 4 different types of values we can model, and I'm going to show you that. So let's say class is equal to q-marginal large, because we're going to have a few of them here. Yeah, just so that they all show nicely. We're also going to model hex with an alpha, RGB, so red, green, blue, with an alpha as well. Let's come down here and do some dummy values for all of them. Hex with an alpha, RGB with an alpha. Now let's put an alpha in here by saying, how about 94FF80? So that 80 part, I happen to know that that means 50% transparency. Let's go over to RGB, and we'll set that to RGB. And how about something red? And I really like pastel colors, so we're going to make this quite pastel-like. That should give us a nice pastel red. And then we'll do the same thing with alpha. RGB A, the A representing the alpha part. And then we'll say 255, so it's red, 40, 40. And now let's set the alpha to 0.5, so 50% transparent. Save it, and now we can scroll down here. This is the hex, so that's a nice blue and with 50% alpha. You can tell it's alpha by the checks in the background there. Come down here, that's the RGB value of red, nice pastel red. And then this is the sort of pastel red with a transparent background. How cool is that? Super easy to get started. Now let's get rid of all of these and move back to a really basic example. Cool. Now the styling is fantastic because there are no surprises here. If we say square, check out the edges here. They get squared off. Not a big difference, but that can be handy. We can say flat and see the shadows at the bottom here. That's going to remove those shadows. We can say bordered. Whoop. Make sure I put that on a new line. And that's just going to add a tiny bit of bordering here, which kind of helps to make it feel like it stands on its own. So that's handy to know. We've also got dark, of course, so we can turn it into the dark theme. And you can see that the borders actually works really well with a dark theme. If I remove borders now, then it's less obvious. What else can we do? Remove all of them, and we can say no dash header, and 3 guesses what that will do. It removes the header. And of course, that means that we're going to have no footer as well. So that gives us a really basic component. However, now we're stuck on this screen. What if we want to be on a different screen? Well, in that case, we can change the default view here and set it to something else. So for example, spectrum, which is the default value, spectrum, we'll have to refresh the page for that to show. Yep, so that's spectrum. We can also set it to tune, which opens up the tuner. Refresh the page. There we go. And the last one we have available to us is palette. And this one is particularly handy when you use it on your own. I'll show you why. But before I show you why, let's make it so that we can see the color here. Because if I change the color, it doesn't change. You can't really tell what I've selected. So let's say Q-avatar. And we're going to change the background of this color, this avatar based on the color that was selected. So we'll say style, and that's going to be equal to a template string, background, and then we'll say hex. So we're going to pull through the modeled hex value there. And there we go. Now we can actually see what's been selected, which is pretty cool. Let's also move this over to the right a little bit. Q-margin left and make that large. Yeah, I just wanted it to be I wanted it to be in line because I'm a little bit pedantic like that. So this works really well when you're using a custom palette. So check this out. We can actually say palette and set this to an array. And then just throw a bunch of values in here. And that's why I've got this tab up here. So now I can just create some of my own values. Copy that and put a hashtag there. Actually, let's copy this down a few times. There we go. We can copy this and paste it in. Change it, copy, paste it in. And so if you only wanted pastel colors on your website, this would be a great way to do it. And just select the colors that you want. And then when users are selecting colors, they can only choose ones that actually fit with the style of your site. So yeah, I reckon that's actually a pretty nice looking palette. There we go. Easy to do. So let's get rid of that now. Move back to a more common example. And another thing we can do here is say disable. And that means that we can't change any of the values, but we can still move through the menus. And to me, this kind of says, hey, don't click on me, I'm doing something. Or I want you to have your focus somewhere else. The other option we have is read only. And to me, that kind of says, hey, you can read this value and look at this data here. It's not the primary focus right now. So a good reason, they do pretty much the same thing, but you might use disable when it's sending a request, for example. And you might use read only when you're just showing something that somebody else has selected, but you don't have permission to change that data. So it's handy to have that functionality available to us. Moving on. So one thing you might want to do is lazy value selection. So I'll give you an example. If I'm changing this value here, and it's changing the theme of my site, so that color is then going to be throughout my entire site, then that's a pretty big operation. And I don't want the entire site to change as I drag here, because it just might overload the computer a little bit. It might just be too much for it to handle and make the UI feel a bit laggy. And so notice as I change this, the value behind the scenes is being updated. What we could do is make this a lazy update. So we can set that value to hex, but now as I change it, it doesn't change the value behind the scenes. Okay. What we can do then is say at change, take the value, and then set hex equal to that value. So that means it's going to wait until the change event, so until the change has actually occurred, then update the value. So check this out. I can go to pink, move my mouse around. It's not going to change that avatar in the bottom left, but as soon as I let go, it changes the value. So let's get rid of that. Change this back to a v-model. What else? Oh, actually, before I move on, we've also got at input. Just to be thorough here, let's say handle input, copy that, and I'll come down here and say methods, handle input, and just do a log there with the value to show you that this actually does work. Just for the sake of being thorough. And there we go. As we move it around, it updates the value behind the scenes. So we can hook into that. Good to know. Get rid of that because I'm not going to be using that in the rest of this video. What else? Well, we can actually use this component inside of a native form. So maybe you're using forms natively in your application, especially if you're not building it as an SPA, and we can handle that as well. So let me show you what that might look like. Let's go wrap this inside of a Q-form. And then we can say at submit. So when this form is submitted, handle submit. Copy that, jump over to our methods and say handle submit. And that's going to give us an event that we can tap into. And for now, let's just console.log that event. Save it. And now we'll also need a button as well. So let's say Q-button. And for a Q button to work inside of a Q form or inside of a native form, we need to set its type equal to submit. And let's set a label equal to submit. Save that. And I want to add a little bit of margining here. Q-margin left, large, just so it aligns nicely. And we'll hide this for now. Cool. So now let's open up the console and submit that form. And now we have an event, which is good. So let's go ahead and dig into that a little bit more. We can say constant form data. So set this to some form data. And pull in the event dot target. So now we've got the form data there. And then let's console.log form data. Save it. Submit. And there we go. We've got that available to us now. And then we can console.log the entries inside there. And notice that that's going to return to us an iterator. You might already know this, but if you don't know much about forms, because especially these days, a lot of you might be building SPAs and not actually do a lot of native form stuff. So that's going to give us an iterator. And what we can do now is iterate over all of the forms entries. And the way we might do that is by saying for constant values, or maybe like key values of, and then all of the entries. So basically we're tapping into that iterator. Now we can console.log those key values. Whoop, there we go. Select a color. And notice that nothing is showing up. The reason is it doesn't actually know what the key should be for this color. So we can go ahead and give it one by saying name is equal to color. And for those of you who have dealt with native forms, this is going to make a lot of sense. There we go. We've got the colors there. And a common pattern you'll also do here is use some destructuring to say, for example, key and then value. And then you might console.log the key and then the value and do something with that. There we go. It works. So that's just like a little bit of stuff that you need to know around forms. The only part you really need to know from what I just said is that a QColor needs to have the name field set. However, for most of you that have dealt with forms before, that's going to be pretty obvious. Okay, so moving on. We've pretty much covered the entire API, but there's one last example that I want to show you, and that's using this inside of a QInput. This is really cool. I found this in the docs, and I just had to show you. Whoop. My reminders are telling me to prepare my week. All right, I can't do that right now. I'm doing a video. So let's come here and get rid of that. We'll start from scratch. Q-input. And let's just model the hex value there. And after saving that, we can now see that that's working. Let's go ahead and throw something inside here now. We're going to use a template. So we're going to dig into a slot. And the slot we want to dig into is append. Let's just check that that works. And there we go. We've tapped into the append slot. And now I can throw a Q-icon in here. And the name of that icon will be colorize. Oh, forgot the C. And what's going on here? Oh, I just had to refresh the page. So now we've got that colorize icon. What else? Well, I want this to be clickable. So when we click this, it's actually going to open up a little dialog where we can change the color. So I'm just going to come in here and say class is equal to cursor pointer. So you could make this a button if you wanted to, but in this example and in the docs, they just use a cursor pointer, probably because we don't want to make it like a really obvious button. It's just like a preference thing. Sometimes you want it to have everything that button has to offer, and sometimes you just want a simple icon that you can click on. So that's what they've done in this scenario. All right, so what we can actually do now is throw something inside of this Q icon, which is called Q-popup-proxy. And I can't wait to show you this component later on in the series, but we're just going to do something basic for now. And what this does is it latches onto the icon so that when it is clicked, whatever is inside of this component will show up as kind of like a pseudo modal or a pseudo dialog. And now we can just say Q-color, so we can use our component and model that hex value like so. Save it and check this out. It works. How easy was that? The markup is virtually nothing, and we have all of this functionality. And if I change that value, it automatically changes the value over here as well. How cool is that? If you don't think that's cool, then check your pulse. And now we can also add another template here. This is kind of my own little flavor I wanted to add on here. And we can say prepend, throw inside there one of my favorite components, which is the Q-avatar. And the way I'm going to use this is by just saying style, throw in there a template string, set the background color equal to whatever the color is. So the hex value here. Check it out. And now that's going to be green because that's the first value that we had. And as I change it, it updates the color there. And you can even come over to a site like this, copy the color, paste it in there, and it automatically updates. It also updates in the component. Man, I love Vue. I love Quasar. I just think this is so cool. Oh, and there's one more thing that I want to show you before I finish. We actually have, and I didn't know this until doing this video, we actually have color validation as well. It's sort of hidden inside of the docs, but I managed to find it whilst building this series. So if we go to import and we say patterns, and we can pull that out of Quasar. Okay, so there's this little patterns component inside of Quasar. So have a search around if you want to see what that's got to offer us. And if I come down to the data property here, I can say, for example, test is color. And this is going to be a function that is going to receive a string, and it's going to test whether or not that string is a valid color. So now this patterns thing that we just pulled in has actually got that function. So we can say test pattern dot any color. Okay, so test if it is any color. So now this function will test if it's a color. I'm going to copy that, scroll up, and check this out. You might not even know this about QInput, but it's got really, really easy validation. If we say rules in here, and we set it equal to an array of all of our rules, and the way this works is first there's a function, then you use the OR operator, and then a string to say what is presented to the user if that function doesn't pass. So you might say, for example, please enter a valid date. Okay, so if this function is true, nothing happens. If it's false, it's going to show this data. This is a fantastic solution to validation. I'll show you how it works. Now we can say, give me the value, and use the arrow function syntax here, and then paste in that test is color function, which is going to take that value. Save it. And now, if we set this to something crazy, bibbidi-bobbidi-bap, it's going to say, please enter a valid value. And if I change it to an actual valid value, that'll go away. And just to show that works, let's copy this, paste it in there, and it's working again. How cool is that? I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it for you. How cool is the QColor Picker component? I'll see you in the next video where we dive into something else.